You were involved in the Kosovo War from the early on. As we come closer to the resolution and the finale of Kosovo status, how do you think this will be played out in the bigger picture, from looking at it from here?
In the long run, Kosovo will be an independent country, part of a peaceful, integrated Balkans that includes Serbia, Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina.
What do you mean in the long run?
The long run depends on what the Serbs do. Will they accept the reality and look to the future of Serbia, which is part of the European Union, or will they cling to a mythic version of the past and deny reality? If they deny reality and try to hold on to Kosovo, they will lose both. They won't be able to retain Kosovo, but they will also lose their chance to join Europe. By Europe, I mean the European Union. And because of the special ties between Serbia and Greece, there's a tremendous opportunity here for Serbia to have an era of prosperity, but only if they face reality. That's up to the leaders of Serbia. The new constitution was a real step in the wrong direction, but it's not going to slow down the efforts of Marti Ahtisaari and Ambassador Frank Wisner. It just isolates the Serbs. I feel very sad about this. I've often been accused of being anti-Serb. This isn't true. I was anti-Milosevic. The current leadership of Serbia has a historic responsibility to face up to the reality. But in Serbia itself, as well as the Serbs of Kosovo, they insist on looking backwards. And to some extent, this is also still happening among some of the Bosnian Serb leaders in Banja Luka. It's a tragedy for the people of Serbia.
But they would say, some critics would say, how would they move forward if Karadzic and Mladic are not caught yet?
I agree that Karadzic and Mladic have to be caught. I've always said that. I've written and said repeatedly that the failure to capture Karadzic and Mladic is the major failure of the West.
So how come the biggest power on earth could not catch somebody like Karadzic and Mladic?
Because NATO didn't make a serious enough effort to catch Karadzic and Mladic. Because Serbian military officials protected Mladic and Serbian monks protected Karadzic. So while I think the NATO failure is enormous, and I'm very upset about it, the Serbs also bear a huge responsibility here. Thank God that Milosevic was delivered to The Hague, where destiny and history caught up with him. If he hadn't gone to The Hague, he would have tried to return to power. And God knows what would have happened if he had done that.
What do you say to the people who think actually it was the diplomats and the lack of political will who let Karadzic and Mladic get away?
It was the lack of political will. I agree with that, but I don't know what you mean by diplomats.
Meaning that you were part of an administration.
Look, are you going to suggest again that I made a deal with Karadzic? Because I'm tired of hearing this piece of crap, which is put out by Karadzic, and for you, from Pristina, to repeat that crap is just ridiculous. The fact is that we made no deal with Karadzic, but it was in Karadzic's interest to put that word out. Now, the failure to capture him was a failure of NATO. The responsibility for protecting him is a Bosnian Serb and a Serb responsibility. So let's get that very straight.
Thank you. What do you predict is the role of Russia going to be in the next coming months? How serious is Russia and China going to be about opposing Kosovo independence?
The real issue is Russia, not China. And Russia's problem is that they're trying to use Kosovo as an excuse for their own ambitions in Georgia. Their goal in Georgia is to overthrow Michael Saakashvili, the president of Georgia. And they're going to try to do that by claiming that whatever happens in Kosovo applies to Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which it doesn't, but the Russian position is it does, then try to make Abkhazia and South Ossetia independent mini-republics, like Republika Srpska before Dayton. That won't fly. It's not acceptable. And the United States, France, Britain, Germany, Italy have agreed they're not going to accept it.
But are they going to accept Russia's arguments at all?
No, not a chance.
they're going to just ignore Russia? How is it going to be played out? They are a member of Security Council. When it comes to deciding, how do you predict it, that they will be put aside, or how will it work?
The Russians will have to decide whether to agree to a resolution or veto a resolution. Chinese are not going to veto.
So what if they don't agree to a resolution? What happens then?
Then the Western powers will have to decide whether to override the Russians and just do it or not. The Russians, I don't think, will veto in the end, but if they do, we'll have a collision course with Russia, which we already have over Georgia.
But do you think Kosovo will be worth for this current administration to go on a rift with Russia? For the U.S. government, how do you predict how
the U.S. has made it absolutely clear that we will stand up to the Russians.
Even if it is about a small place like Kosovo?
It's the most critical, unresolved area of instability in Europe.
The Albanians are currently focusing their lobbying efforts in the U.S. Do you think they should be lobbying actually Brussels or even Russia?
That's up to them. I can't tell them where to lobby.
But how does diplomacy? Albanians currently do not have even an office, foreign offices abroad, to plead their case. Do you believe they are losing momentum at the moment?
History is on the side of Kosovo Albanians for the first time in 800 years. The horrible events of 1912 and 1989 are in the process of being reversed. Albanians are very understandably impatient to accelerate history. I share that impatience. I feel the administration, the Bush administration, was very wrong not to move in the first term. It would have been much easier to get Kosovo independence in 2002 than it is today. However, history is moving inexorably, unstoppably in the direction of the Kosovo Albanians, and they must be resolved. The most important thing they must show is that they will be open to the rights of the Serb minority. That's the #1 issue.
Why has the issue of status resolvement been delayed since '99? Who do you believe is responsible for that?
President Bush and his administration is responsible for the delay. They allowed it to happen, knowing full well that the United Nations and the European Union would never push it. The impetus for this action had to come from the United States, and the failure was appalling. And I had very intense arguments with Secretary of State Powell and his team about this. Ambassador Jones, Beth Jones, the Assistant Secretary of State, and the people surrounding her, all were inexcusably slow-moving.
So no matter what Kosovars would do, you think the delay was up to the Bush administration? Or was it at all up to Kosovars?
No, the Kosovars had no ability to move the process. They had been liberated from the Serbs in 1999. Milosevic was overthrown in September of 2000, but then nothing more happened for 4 years. And finally, when Condoleezza Rice became Secretary of State and Nick Burns became Undersecretary of State, and Burns had worked for me, he was at Dayton with me, we finally got some movement. And I credit Undersecretary Burns and Secretary Rice with the movement, and then they made a brilliant decision. They appointed Frank Wisner as the American envoy. Frank Wisner is one of the greatest diplomats of his generation. And Wisner has just mastered the issue, and he and Ahtisaari will push it forward. But the fault for the delay was entirely the first term of the Bush administration. And I argued this vigorously with Colin Powell and Assistant Secretary Beth Jones. They were wrong, and now it's more difficult than it would have been 5 years ago.
Thank you. What would you say?
You know that.
What would you say to Albanians who feel they are losing the grounds in the bad image? They're getting bad press since the March riots and onward.
I think the Kosovar Albanians must recognize that their image is dependent on the way they treat the Serb minority. I know that the Serbs did not treat them well, and I know the desire for revenge is very great in that part of the world. However, we must move forward. Where is the Albanian Nelson Mandela? the person who says we must have truth and reconciliation? Where is the person who will look to the future the way Alija Izetbegović did in Bosnia, when on the final morning of the Dayton Agreement negotiations in 1995, he said to me, "This is not a perfect peace, and it is not a just peace, but we need peace, and I will go this route." Look at Bosnia today. It's doing much better than it did during the war. Nobody's been killed for 11 years. It's not perfect, but the troops went from 60,000 down to just a few thousand, and the country's at peace. All that is possible if two things happen. Belgrade recognizes that history will give Kosovo independence, and the Albanians recognize that with independence comes a responsibility to protect the minority. Each side must make a big concession. It's like South Africa, and Nelson Mandela was the great man who, after 27 years in jail, could come out of jail, unite the country, and reach out to the very people who put him in jail. Do you know that Nelson Mandela, when he was inaugurated as president of South Africa, invited as his personal guests to the inauguration the prison guards who had guarded him in prison? That was his gesture of reconciliation. Where is the Kosovar Nelson Mandela? Where is the Serb?
Such a figure does not exist.
What?
What if such a figure does not exist? What should be done in the Balkans?
Then you have to go forward. Such figures are very rare in history. Mandela's the greatest person in the world today, don't you think? I think he's the greatest person I ever met. But he is a model. You had one great leader in Belgrade, Djindjic, who was willing to reach out. And when he was murdered, it made it more difficult.
Do you believe Ahtisaari will advise independence in his final recommendation?
Ahtisaari will recommend independence.
You believe he will mention independence in his recommendation? He will mention it? He will not leave it up to countries to recognize or not? What do you believe?
I don't understand your question.
Do you think that independence will be one of his recommendations
Yes,
in the end result?
Yes.
And what, if you're a realist, would you now say that Serbia will accept? What do you think, how do you predict it, knowing the countries, being in the region so long? Do you believe Serbia will accept independence?
I expect Serbia will not accept independence. They will be forced to accept independence.
Do you believe
I don't think there are any Serb...
Who will force them?
Let me...
Okay.
I don't think there will be any Serb leader who has the courage to get up and say Serbia should allow Kosovo to become an independent country. And this constitution makes it all the more difficult. But I think the international community will declare Kosovo as become an independent country, and then Serbia will have no choice.
International community as such is not one compact thing. What if some will not accept Kosovo independence immediately?
The only countries that matter here are the UN Security Council members, and as we've already discussed, the most important of those is Russia. Because Russia, if Russia uses the veto, we'll have an absolute crisis. And that crisis will extend far beyond Kosovo. It will extend to Russia's relations with Britain, France, the United States, Germany, and Italy, and it will extend to Georgia as well.
How long do you think it's going to take then?
I think this will be resolved in a few months. I'm still optimistic.
Even if the crisis happens?
I don't think it will. I can't believe the Russians are that stupid, but let's see. This is not about Kosovo for the Russians. The Russians don't give a damn about the Serbs. They care about Georgia. They are incredibly angry at Michael Saakashvili. They want to overthrow Michael Saakashvili.
So will the U.S. go on the side of Saakashvili to help if the Russians will say, we'll allow Kosovo independence, but we'll do what we want in Georgia?
The U.S. will not agree to that deal.
The U.S. has the energy now with everything going on to actually bother about what goes on in Georgia?
The U.S. will not accept that deal according to what they've said publicly. They will not let a Security Council resolution be passed for Kosovo, which can be applied to Abkhazia and South Ossetia.
Final question. What do you believe Albanians should do one day after status is declared? How do you see the future holding from them? What would you advise them?
Reach out to the Bosnian Serbs and send them public messages that they want to live in peace with the Serbs. I know how difficult that is, but that's the only way to avoid continuing killing and rape and crimes forever.
What if the deal that Kosovo gets in the end is not much better what Bosnia got in the end? Would you believe that's good enough for Kosovo?
I don't know what you're talking about.
In a sense that...
I think Bosnia got a pretty good deal. Bosnia is independent, it's at peace, and there's complete economic relations between all of Bosnia. It was not partitioned, it's one country.
But what if the north behaves like Republika Srpska? If the north of Kosovo?
They won't have that status. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about two entities like Republika Srpska and the Federation.
But maybe the reality will be like that. The North will continue acting like they are a part of Serbia.
If you're talking about the northern Obstinas,
the north of Kosovo, basically.
If one of the Obstina is self-governing on local affairs, police, garbage collection, that's fine. That's the way systems work. If they have close economic relations with Serbia, that's fine too. I want to see an economic union of that whole area, and the whole area then join the rest of Europe.
Would you say Albania shouldn't worry, even if the North gets to run its own courts, its own police, its own economic affairs? The central Pristina government should not worry too much about this if this is a part of the end deal.
That's a very tough question, and the answer lies in the details. You said police, courts, and economic affairs. Those are three very different things. Local police, it's okay, but national, police that become part of a corrupt system, not so good. I drove from Sarajevo to Srebrenica last year, and when we went from the Federation to Srpska, we changed police escorts. And then Serb police escorted us to Srebrenica for the memorial services, which Boris Tadic came to his very great credit. And it was a remarkable sight. I'm not deluding myself. I know that those police are corrupt. On both sides of Bosnia, they're corrupt. I know what's going on there, more or less. But the system is allowed the country to be peaceful. Now, it's not perfect. It's corrupt. There are criminal gangs in all parts of Bosnia. And I know that's corrupt in Kosovo and Serbia as well, and Montenegro. The whole area is full of organized crime. But let's be clear about this. Our goal is not to fix every problem in the universe in one day with one UN resolution. It's to fix the status of Kosovo, and that status must be independence.
Is the U.S. afraid of the Serb radicals or radicalization of Serbia?
You have to ask the administration.
Delaying the talks because of the Serbian election, does it mean that the U.S. is a little bit wary of whether Serbia may be radicalized?
I can't speak for the administration.
Okay. Finally, looking back at the years you were involved in Kosovo War in particular, is there anything you regret when you look back?
In Kosovo?
Yes.
I'm very clear on what I regret about Bosnia, which is that we weren't more aggressive. We should have done it earlier. We should not have agreed to Republika Srpska as the name of the Serb part of the country. That name was a bad name, and that was my mistake. We should have disarmed the Bosnian Serb army right away and integrated everyone, and we should have given more power to the center. So Bosnia, I'm very clear on. We could have done things better. But a lot of those problems have been fixed over time. In Kosovo, the biggest regret I have, and of course capturing Mladic Karadzic, that was the #1 problem. But that wasn't a problem of Dayton, that was a problem of implementation in Bosnia. Now, in regard to Kosovo, I think that by and large, the first phase, 98, 99, came out pretty well. Very few people were killed compared to Bosnia, very few. And it is true people were driven out of their homes and there were refugees for a while, but it wasn't that long a period of time, and there are no more refugees, and they went home very quickly. However, the colossal mistake of 2001, 2002, of the new Bush administration turning its back on Kosovo and not negotiating immediately final status when it would have been easier to do, is one we will pay for a long time to come. And we also had Prime Minister Đinđić, who was the closest thing Serbs have had to a visionary leader. And for his courage, he was assassinated.
Thank you.
You're tough.
Thank you. I try.
Yeah, well, you succeed.